Hey, this is Ina with you in the Fight Back. And this is a follow up to the FAQ I did on Israel and isn't it the only democracy in the Middle East? And I realize, and through various comments I've received, it, that I didn't really speak about the situation of the Palestinians within Israel proper behind the 1967 lines. So that's what I want to talk about today. And we know, as Israel describes itself, as a Jewish democratic state. And we can tell as we unravel how the Palestinians live within Israel itself, how well it upholds both of these. Now, Israel, in many senses, is democratic. Formally, there is a legal system that doesn't have the type of abuses you may see in, say, Saudi Arabia. There's freedom of the press to a greater extent than a great deal of the Middle East, and there's periodic elections. All of this to be commended. Yet, we know that in 1985, for example, there was an amendment added to the Basic Law. The Basic Law is essentially Israel has no formal constitution, but it has basic laws that serve that function in many respects. So there's a basic law, there's an amendment to the Basic Law, and it prohibits participation in elections by candidates who expressly or by implication oppose the existence of Israel as a state of the Jewish people. Now, there's probably someone there watching this video who's guessing or thinking, well, what's wrong with Israel being a state for the Jewish people? Well, I have an idea. How appealing do you think Germany was as a state of the Aryan people, or the United States as a country for white people? I allow you to think that through. Now, there are many within Israel, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, who call for a democratic multinational state. And this is condemned as calling for Israel's destruction, because it's saying we need to be a state for all the people who live within the borders, not necessarily privileging one group above another. Because that's, in a sense, what Israel does in many respects. After Israel achieved independence in 1950, there was a law passed called the right of return. And Jews anywhere in the world, whether it's Poland, whether it's France, the United States, Argentina, wherever they are, can go to Israel and become citizens. It's essentially theirs by right. It doesn't matter if they've never been to Israel. It doesn't matter, or any of that. They can go to Israel and become citizens. Well, Palestinians, those who say were driven out in 1948, those who had perhaps their families had lived there for generations, they cannot go back. The right of return does not apply to them. And Israel also has engaged in systematic dispossession of its Palestinian citizens. For instance, also in 1950 was something passed called the absentee property law that declared land to be abandoned if the owners were absent for just one day from, say, November of 1947 on. And this was explicitly targeting the Palestinians, many of whom during the war that led to Israel's founding had to flee their homes in terror. And they could not go back. And as a result, due to this law, a lot of their homes and lands were seized. And the law justifies the seizure of Palestinian lands, and it consolidates state control. And we'll go into momentarily about how exactly this state control works. In 1955, another law was passed, the Land Acquisition Law, and that confirms the government's title to land previously classified as absentee. So the Palestinians flee in 1948, even if it's just for a day. The land is taken by Israel, sanctified by law, and transferred to government control. And again, this is done to confiscate Palestinian land, and it's transferred to Jewish possession. How, you may ask? Well, there's several ways this happened. From 1948 through 1966, about 85% of the Palestinians in Israel itself lived under military rule. So you can imagine a lot of basic rights were not respected. Martial law is martial law. The military rules. There's a permit system, and there was all sorts of regulations that were passed without, say, due process. And this also included the seizure of lands. Well, there's something called the Jewish National Fund, or the JNF. Now, the JNF was originally created before the establishment of the State of Israel, during the period of colonization when Jewish settlers were coming into the country. And the JNF was originally created to acquire land for Jewish settlement. That means they would buy, through fair means or foul, from Arabs land, and they would use it to settle Jews. And it was set up to encourage Jewish settlement, or Zionist settlement. And after 1948, even though there's now an official government in place, the JNF is still there. And in 1950, the JNF had control of 40% of Palestinian so-called abandoned land. And the JNF is also working with the Israeli Land Administration, which is a state agency. And together, these two organs, they control 93% of the land in Israel. And the JNF, according to its actual statutes, can only sell land to Jews, not to all the citizens. That means Palestinians cannot buy back, say, the land they lost in 1948. And they make sure that the land is owned by Jews, and this is sanctioned by state law. So in a sense, the JNF is handling a lot of this kind of pretty much in collusion with the Israeli Land Administration, but it's almost, in a sense, not an official state organ, but it's still very much doing a lot of this discrimination. So as you can see, here in the United States, you used to write, racists would write into, say, property can never be sold to a black person, or could never be sold to an Irish Catholic. And that's essentially been outlawed. But this JNF practice is essentially the same thing. Now again, Palestinians lived under military rule until 1966. And afterwards, land was continually confiscated from the Palestinians and given over to new Jewish settlements, particularly in, say, the areas of the Galilee. And now, so things are perhaps slightly better for the Palestinians not living under military rule. But to give you an example, Palestinians make up, within Israel proper, about 1/5 of its population, so about 20%. Yet, only 4% of the budget in 2008, so that's fairly recent, of the budget went to Arabs. And according to Israeli statistics, 1/2 of Arab families live below the poverty line. Now, also, there's a lot of Israelis live under poverty as well, and we've seen protests against that lately. And I hope they can break with the Zionist consensus, and hope they can push for more social equality. Another important thing to note about the Palestinians within Israel itself, we've seen how the Israelis have dispossessed the Palestinians. And even though there are many, they have members in parliament, they have their own presses, but the budget is not helping them. A lot of them are living under poverty and not getting state assistance. But because Israel considers itself a Jewish democratic state, it's by implication, by its very ideology, promoting one ethnic group, or one group of people, Jews over non-Jews. And some people will be like, well, the Jews have been suffered through since time forever. Shouldn't they be given that preference? How right was it when it was Aryans over Jews? And now you want to do the reverse thing? Way to learn. Shouldn't it be about equality between Jew, non-Jew, Jew, Gentile? I don't get that. But anyway, Palestinians inside the state of Israel, they've been considered a danger, a fifth column if you were. And this is legitimized by official Zionist ideology, which wants a state for Jewish people. And we've seen how the right of return does not benefit the Palestinians. And there are frequent discussions by Israeli officials over the danger of the Arab birth rate, that the Arabs will outbreed them like the Arabs are just some sort of cattle or animals. And this would endanger the Jewish majority or Jewish supremacy over the Israel itself. And the current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said on many occasions that he repeatedly calls for Israel to remain Jewish. And we've seen that Israel, to remain Jewish, has to discriminate against non-Jews. And we see also, furthermore, that those Palestinians who were driven out in 1948, and some of them left to other parts within Israel proper, but they can never go back to the homes they lost in 1948. Others went abroad, whether it's Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan, or wherever. They can never come back, even if they had lived in the area for centuries. The point behind all this is to say that Israel, despite its often lofty claims of being the only democracy in the Middle East, in fact is a colonial settler regime that consistently practiced discrimination against its non-Jewish citizens. And the time has come for Israel to become a single democratic, socialist, secular state with equal rights for all people living within its borders.